Mrs. Butterworth bottles are now found in antique shops, and I picked one up recently having no idea the history, so I thought this would be a good story to do. Once I got home, I realized that I confused Mrs. Butterworth with Aunt Jemima. So let's do the story on both, and let's sort this out on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. Firstly, Mrs. Butterworth's history doesn't go back very far. She was introduced in 1961 by Lever Brothers Company. Just real quick about the Lever Brothers, they were British. Their names were William and James. They used to make soap way back in 1885. Eventually, their company made their way to the United States in 1925. Both brothers had died by this time, and the company acquired some businesses, and at some point a merge happened with a Dutch company called Margarine Unie, forming the firm called Unilever, which owns a lot of companies now. I tried looking back in Google Books and newspapers hoping that there was a Mrs. Butterworth story somewhere, but I only found a bunch of advertisements. I was hoping to find even a fictional story for this character, and I never found one. She's a grandmotherly type looking lady with her hair pulled back in a bun, and she's wearing a dress and an apron. Her hands are folded neatly in front of her, and there's no story to why this shape of bottle was chosen. I would guess it's because that she just looks like a comforting motherly figure. She looks like she would take care of you. I found that with most of their ads, it almost always includes recipes. Here's one of the very first advertisements that I found in 1961, complete with a recipe for apricot pancakes. Some recipes are interesting and some of them are really off the wall, which kind of fits the 60s and 70s. Those eras really produced some really weird food combinations. Like this one here, where you make grilled cheese sandwiches and then you pour syrup over the top of them. It's not that crazy, but... The glass bottles changed to plastic bottles in 1999. The glass bottles did have some variations throughout the years. The older ones, I feel like her neck is too long. Her shirt collar ruffle is different. There's some smaller bottles and some larger ones. The date on the bottom of mine is 1976, and I've got the original yellow cap on mine. I noticed there's this little deformity on the back here, or is it supposed to look like that? I don't think so. Apparently she never had a first name until the company held a contest in 2009, and the name that won was Joy, and I don't think that fits her at all. I think she needs an older name like Mildred or Dorothy or Eleanor or Mary. Even Elizabeth would work. Elizabeth Butterworth. I think that fits her much better. I'm aware of the more recent claims that Mrs. Butterworth is racist. There's a story out there that suggests that she was modeled after Butterfly McQueen, who played Scarlett's maid from Gone with the Wind. But as far as I could find, that story was made up in 2020. I searched Google for literally anything before 2020 that would suggest that, and there is nothing. Mrs. Butterworth was invented more than 20 years after that film. And in fact, I can't even confirm that Mrs. Butterworth is black or white. So, I'm just going to leave Mrs. Butterworth's story at that. So, let's take a look at Aunt Jemima. This one has a few racial undertones, but this ended up being a lot more interesting than I anticipated. I was surprised at how much story was actually there for this one. This story actually has a history dating back to 1888. A guy named Chris Rutt was a newspaper editor. He and a friend, Charles Underwood, decided to buy a small flour mill in St. Joseph, Missouri. This 1888 newspaper article states that the Pearl Milling Company was incorporated yesterday for the purpose of manufacturing roller process meal. The meal will be kiln dried so as to keep for 4 years in any climate. It says the South is an immense market for this product, so they will be focusing on that region. It says the mill will also manufacture graham flour, which we've covered in another video. Basically, it's just flour made from ground wheat kernels. It doesn't add or take away from the flour, which is full of fiber and nutrients, but it doesn't have much of a shelf life, like only 3 days. So that's why the white flour that we get in the store is so bad for us, because it has all the good stuff stripped out of it so that it can sit on the shelf longer. So the way I'm kind of putting this puzzle pieces together here is that Chris Rutt is not really interested much in this field. He's a very successful newspaper editor, and he spends just a few years with his hands in this company before going back to the newspapers. He probably never left it, but his son-in-law, named William Wachtel or Wachtel, has experience in the milling industry. So this is probably to help him get off the ground. So while trying to compete with all the other flour mills around, they decided to combine wheat flour, corn flour, calcium phosphate with soda and salt, and sold it in 1-pound paper bags as ready-mix pancake flour. The story for how the Aunt Jemima trademark came about has a lot of different versions. Apparently there was a vaudeville show that Chris Rutt attended, and it's a show where 2 guys were in blackface named Baker and Farrell, and they sang this catchy tune called Aunt Jemima while they were dressed with red bandanas in their hair. The song was catchy enough that it inspired him to make Aunt Jemima the trademark for the pancake flour. After 2 years in the business, Aunt Jemima had gained such popularity that the name changes in the directory from Pearl Milling Company here in 1889 to Aunt Jemima Manufacturing Company in 1890. This address listed here is 716 Messany, which takes me here. And directly across the street here is this military museum, but it originally was a police station built by Chris Rutt in 1890. Isn't that interesting? I guess I was wrong about the whole son-in-law thing. This says that 1 year after they started, the son-in-law sells his stock to Rutt and Underwood. Oh well. Moving on. This 1950 article says the individual who really put this town on the map was a plump, smiling southern mammy cook who never really existed, but whose scrumptious pancakes have made her name and face familiar wherever people appreciate good food. That description could fit no one but Aunt Jemima. It says, since Aunt Jemima Company started in 1889, 60 years ago by this time, more than 200 companies have copied the idea and now sell ready-made pancake mix. In 1892, we had a fire that did some major damage to the company. In 1893, only 4 years into the pancake business, Rutt sold the business to R.T. Davis. I can't tell if Underwood is still involved. I don't think so, because I can't find him in the directory. Here's an ad with Davis Milling Company. And I'm not sure if it's Randolph Davis Sr. or Jr. that's running the company, or both. Sr. ends up dying the following year, so I'm guessing Jr. ends up running it. Anyways, Davis took the Aunt Jemima idea and he ran with it. He thought to make the trademark for this product a living, breathing person. This is the first time that this was done. A fictitious story was made up for her. This lady would come from the plantation, whose pancakes won the hearts of battle-weary Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. The story says that she was then persuaded to move to St. Joseph, Missouri and oversee the manufacturing of her pancake flour. The very first year that Davis had Aunt Jemima is the very first time the living Aunt Jemima made her first public appearance at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. The legendary figure of Aunt Jemima has been incarnated by a host of bandanaed Aunt Jemima demonstrators over the years. The first woman who would play Aunt Jemima was a lady named Nancy Green. She was born in 1834 in Kentucky. It's hard for me to find records for her. One source says that she was born a slave and later freed. So at this World's Fair, she debuted her act. She held a demonstration, making delicious pancakes for thousands of people. One of the phrases that she coined during that fair was, "Eyes in town, honey," which was used for many years afterwards. When she would be in town, it would be in the advertisements that way. She portrayed Aunt Jemima so supremely that she was taken to be the real Aunt Jemima, so much so that it says nothing could be said to dispel that legend. It says no one imagined the fame that she would achieve. She was sent all over the country, and she embraced the role wholeheartedly. That is, until she was asked to go to the Paris exposition. She firmly declined. They have her quoted as saying, "They ain't no man gonna get me on the water. I was born in this country, I'm gonna die here, not somewhere twixt here and somewhere else." In 1902, the Davis Mill Company went through a bankruptcy. How, I don't know, but it was reorganized by a Robert R. Clark and Associates. In 1914, the firm was reorganized again to the Aunt Jemima Mills Company with Mr. Clark as president. Miss Nancy Green served her role dutifully for about 30 years until 1923, when she was at the wrong place, wrong time. 89-year-old Miss Nancy was walking down the sidewalk when two cars collided, and one of the cars was pushed off the road and it struck her. She didn't survive. Her find-a-grave site is one of the most elaborate I've ever seen, and so is her grave apparently. Here's a 1924 Christmas ad encouraging people to get themselves some Aunt Jemima rag dolls for the kids for Christmas. In 1925, the company was sold to Quaker Oats Company for close to $4 million. Mr. Clark stayed on as a general manager. Here's a 1938 newspaper article talking about Aunt Jemima coming to town, and she walks on stage and she says, "I've been so busy I ain't had time to pray except walking." And then she went on to sing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." This actress playing Jemima now was described in the newspaper here as 340 pounds of Negro cheerfulness. Apparently she had a pretty full schedule. I hope all these actresses were paid well. I'm sure it was a lot of work. 1949, apparently there were paintings painted to tell the story of Aunt Jemima way back in the 1910s, which are now considered, in 1949, valuable. I wonder if any of them survive today. Several women continued to play the role of the traditional Aunt Jemima until the 1960s. In the 60s, the character was given a makeover. She became slimmer and she lost the bandana, which was stereotypical of her being a slave. She was given a more modern hairstyle and pearl earrings. In 1994, Gladys Knight had appeared in some Aunt Jemima commercials, and she got some criticism for it. Gladys insisted that the trademark had been updated and it was no longer offensive. 2020, the racist claims persisted and the brand was rebranded from Aunt Jemima back to the original Pearl Milling Company by its current owner, which is Pepsi. So to finish up, I do this channel because I love history and I think that it's really important to know our history. I found these stories really interesting and I hope you did too. I hope everybody's having a great, wonderful day, and thank you for watching.
Eddie, this is Mrs. Butterworth. Hello, Eddie. I love your syrup. I make 2 syrups, regular and light. Mrs. Butterworth. And they're both delicious
because they're thick and rich and buttery.
She really talks better than you.
Mrs. Butterworth's is thick and rich and buttery. It's a delicious part of this nutritious breakfast. Mrs. Butterworth's, regular and light.
Aunt Jemima presents Peggy and Chuck. Let's join them for breakfast.
Couple of hungry characters here. Hey, what's that?
Well, those are apple rings. This is pancake batter, and that's sausage.
Hey, that might be pretty good.
Pretty good. Wait till you try it. There's a batch already.
Hey, these are good. Where'd you get this idea?
Magazine ad over here.
We have a very clever mommy.
Try Peggy's new way to serve Aunt Jemima's. First, saute some apple rings and place on the griddle. Next, pour on the Aunt Jemima pancake batter. Then add your favorite sausages. Aunt Jemima. Perfect pancakes in 10 shakes.